In this video we're going to explore how you can prototype your business intelligence solution and build a data warehouse. So let's meet the people we're going to use throughout this case study. First person we're going to meet is Sarah. Sarah is our sales manager. She's a decision maker in the business, but she's currently frustrated by having a lot of data stored within her ERP system and other business systems within the business. But that data is hard to access, hard to analyse, hard to report on. She wants to be looking at trends and she can't get to that information. She very much wants to be able to respond more quickly to markets, to give customers better product service and increase her profitability. The second person we're going to work with is Bill. Bill is a key user within the business. He very much understands the business's processes and data, and also understands the concepts of modelling business intelligence data and building business intelligence solutions. But crucially, Bill is non-technical. He's a business user with very little technical experience previously. So the first thing that's going to happen is Bill is going to go and talk to Sarah, and Bill really wants a requirement so that he can start developing this prototype. We're going to ask Bill to gather a very small user story, just a very small snippet which gives us enough information to start building our solution. So the first requirement that Sarah gives us is that a sales manager for Contoso, she wants to see some numbers, the quantity sold, turnover, cost and margin, and she wants to be able to filter and slice and dice those by customers, items and salespeople. So Bill takes that user story and starts to analyse the types of data that are within it and how he can get them and how he's going to present them to the user. So initially he identifies that there are two types of information in here. There are some numerical values that Sarah wants to be able to report on and some things that Sarah wants to be able to slice and dice by. So he quickly identifies that all of these numerical values are based on sales transactions and identifies that the measures within those sales transactions are going to be quantity sold, turnover, cost and margin, and that the slicing and dicing information, the dimensions that we want to be able to manipulate, are customers, items and salespeople. He then goes back to Sarah and says, in order for me to present you a prototype, you need to give me some data. So Sarah gives him some data based on the real world so that she can understand the data when it comes back in the prototype, so that she can sign off and say, yep, that's exactly what I need inside my BI solution. So Sarah provides some information for the dimensions, for items, customers and salespeople, and some sample sales transactions that she can add up the numbers to make sure that everything is working correctly. Bill then asks Sarah for some acceptance criteria. How are we going to sign off on this? Sarah's a business user, so she works in Excel, so she asks Bill to present back using Excel and basically says that if you can show me quantity sold, turnover, cost and margin, and I can slice and dice that by customers, items and salespeople, then you have what we need to make life easier for the sales department. So let's go and have a look at building the prototype. Okay, so Bill's now going to pick up the story. So he opens up his copy of Time Extender. Time Extender is the prototyping tool we're going to use. It's also the tool we're going to use later on for building the ETL and also building the cube to demonstrate the prototype back to the user. So initially Bill's going to start creating a data structure for our prototype. So Bill knows from the user story that we need to create a dimension for customers, so he's going to do that, and he also needs to create a dimension table to store information about our items and also our salespeople. And then once we've got our dimensions, we're going to need our fact table that holds the transactional values, so we're going to create a fact table for sales transactions. And then from there we're going to need to identify from our user story the fields that we want to store in each of those tables. So for the customers we're going to need some information to key the field based on so that we can form relationships between the dimensions and the fact tables. So we're going to use a customer number for that. Notice here that we can select data types and all kinds of technical configuration, but from a prototyping point of view, Bill's a functional user, so he's just going to create it with the defaults and leave the complex technical configuration to a technical person later on, and we'll meet that person when we come to look at ETL later. So then from our user story, we know that we want to store our customer name, and that's all probably now from this point of view from a customer. So we're going to go and add the fields to our items. So again, we're going to need some kind of item number. We're going to need the name of the item, And then similarly for salespeople, we're going to need a salesperson ID and a salesperson name. And then for our sales transactions, we're going to need those fields to store our measures information. Initially, we're going to want to create some relationships to our dimensions, so we're going to want to map those fields. So we're going to put our customer number in here again. We're going to put our item number in here, and we're going to put our salesperson ID in here. And also, we're then going to set up those relationships so that each of those tables is joined to the other one. So we can do that in Time Extender simply by getting hold of the customer number in the dimension table and dragging and dropping it onto the customer number in the transaction table. Time Extender asks us if we want to create a relationship, which we do, and that relationship is down here. So we want to do the same on the item number. Yes, we want to create a relation, and the same on the salesperson ID. We'll create a relation there. Okay. So we now have the structure created. Okay, so we've got our relationships defined. We now want to add the fields from our user story that are going to store the numerical values. So let's add a field for our quantity sold. This time we're going to select numeric because we want to be able to do some calculations based on that. And our quantity sold is going to be an integer, so that's okay. We're going to add a field for line amount. And again, that's going to be numeric. This is a cost value, so we're going to put a couple of decimals in there. Going to add another one for cost amount. And again, that's numeric, and because that's a monetary value, we're going to give it a couple of decimals. And we're going to put in our margin column as well. That's going to be numeric, and we'll put a couple of decimals in there. Okay. So we've got our structure, and all of these fields are just going to hold values, except for the margin field, which is going to be a calculation. We know that's going to be a calculation. We got that information from Sarah, so we can add that in. So we're going to create a transformation on that, and we're going to model that transformation. So we're going to select a custom transformation from the menu, and we're then going to say that our custom transformation is actually going to be our line amount, and then we're going to take our line amount and we're going to subtract our cost amount from it to give us our calculated margin. So let's just grab the cost amount and put that in there as well. Okay, so we have that down here now, so we can see that that's a calculated field, and all the rest are just ready to accept data. So Time Extender now gives us the power to put our test data, our test cases in there, and configure the table so that we can present that back to the user as the prototype. So I'm just going to execute this project, which will push the definition out to our database server. Just give that a second. So this will create all the tables in the data warehouse structure. So we've effectively now got our technical data warehouse configured on our SQL Server backend server. And you notice now all the red clears from here, so that we know that this structure is embedded, and we can use it inside our solution. So next, if we go down here, we have the option to add some custom data to the customers table. So you see here, these are the fields in our customers table, and we can just start keying in data here. So we can say we have a customer A, which is in our case a company called Arrow Foods. We have a customer B, and that is a customer called Bulk Buys, and we have a customer C, and that is Cost Savers. And this data is coming directly from our user story that Sarah gave us in the scenario. So we'll OK that. We've now got some customer data. We can then go and add some items. So from our user story, we had 4 items. So that was A, which was an apple, and B, which was a banana, and C, which was a coconut, and D, which was a donut. And we can do the same for salespeople. So again, Sarah told us that for the purposes of the model, we've got 4 salespeople. We've got one called Andrew. We've got a salesperson called Becky. We've got a salesperson called Charlie. And we've got a salesperson called Dawn. Okay, that. And the same for sales transactions. So we're going to go down here and add our custom data. and then we're going to enter some sales transactions directly from our case study. Okay, so we have our custom data for sales transactions. Okay, that. And we'll deploy and execute that and put that data into our data warehouse tables. So now that's in place and we've got some test data in our tables, we can test just to check, make sure we've definitely got that in there, so we can do a preview of the table and we can see in here that we've got our salesperson ID and our salespeople, some of the fields that Time Extender's added that we will use in the ETL process, but we don't need to worry about them. Now, in order to present our prototype back to our end user to get acceptance, we need to build a quick cube on top of that. Okay, so we've moved over to the Cubes tab. We can now create the cube so that we can connect Excel and demonstrate our prototype. So from here, we can open our data warehouse window, which is just a copy of the window we had open on the other tab, and we can start building up our prototype cube. So from our user story, we know that we had a dimension called customers, so we can just grab the customers data warehouse table and drop it on the dimensions. Time Extender understands that we want to create a dimension with that, and that then asks us to choose what fields we want. So we want our customer number and our customer name, so we select those fields, and it asks us which is the key, which is the customer number, and we do the same with our items dimension table, and select the item number and the item name field, and key it on the item number, and do the same with the salespeople, and choose those fields and key on the item ID, and that's our three dimensions built now, so we can slice and dice by customers, items and salespeople. We now need to create our cube, and because we've defined all those relationships, we can just take our sales fact table and create our cube. So Time Extender is now going to ask us what we want our measures to be called, so we're just going to create the measures from the user story. So the first one we're going to create is called quantity sold. And that comes from our sales transactions table, but the field is this one, quantity sold. And we're going to select OK on that one. And then we're going to create our turnover value, which comes from our sales transaction table. And that's the sum of our line amount field. So you notice here we've got sum selected. We can select some other functions as well, like min and max and average and count. We're going to take the sum, which is the default option. Our third measure then is going to be our cost amount, and that is going to be similarly some of our cost amounts from our fact table. And then the final measure we're going to use is our margin, which if you remember was our calculated field, and our calculated field was called margin. So we have no data in there in the sample, but Time Extender is going to calculate that for us, and that's all the measures we want to create. So we want to close that. Time Extender now says we've got some relationships to dimensions. Do you want to use them? Well, yes, we want to use all of those. We'll select those, click OK, and close our data warehouse window. So we now have both our data warehouse over here on the data tab and our cube structure defined. We can now do a manual deployment and execution of that to push our model through to the server. Okay, so now we have our cube defined with our measures in here, and we have our dimensions linked to it below, and we have our data warehouse. They will now persist on the server, so we can move over to Excel now and start testing our prototype. So if we open up a copy of Excel, and then using the standard Excel data function, we can go and say that we want to create data source to another source, and we can select analysis services, and we can connect to our SQL analysis services instance, and we can select the cube that we're working with, which is called our sales prototype and our sales transactions cube. We can say finish on that and add that into Excel. And we now get an Excel pivot table, and we can start looking at the values. So we can say show me the customers then, and we can show them by name, so we could get rid of the customer number to make it easier to read. We could have a look at what items each of those customers have purchased, and then we could put the numerical values for cost amount, margin, quantity sold and turnover in there. We could also say, actually, I'm more interested in that by items sold by salespeople, and this is standard Excel, so we can just reformat that and see that the other way around. So this now gives Bill the tool that he needs to go and present this back to Sarah. He could give Sarah the connection details to the cube so she can go and test it herself. She can do the calculations and check to make sure that our calculated margin column here does actually add up, and if you subtract one value from the other you do get the margin. And that should allow Sarah to sign off on the prototype. Okay, so Bill's now built his prototype and he's given the prototype back to Sarah. Sarah can now validate our success criteria and say that as the sales manager I can now see quantity sold, turnover, cost and margin in our model, and I'm able to slice and dice that by customers, items and salespeople. So where do we go from here? So the next phase of this project would be to build the ETL and connect in our data sources, our ERP system, our sales management system, and we can then start to evolve our solution in iterations and start to build out a full BI solution. And then on top of that, Sarah's going to want to see things in a slightly more graphical way. She's probably going to then want to push out this BI to her team and using some of the Microsoft Stack technology. So the next couple of videos in this series will explore those topics a bit further.